Welcome to the Startup of the Year podcast, where each episode we showcase exciting new companies from around the world. This podcast is produced by Established, creators of the Startup of the Year program. Established is focused on helping organizations with their innovation, startup, and communication strategies.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Startup of the Year podcast. I'm Frank Gruber, the co-founder and co-CEO of Established, co-founder of Established Ventures, and the team behind the Startup of the Year community and this very podcast. And we appreciate you being here. Thanks for coming back if you've been a long-time listener, and thanks to everyone new that's just joined us. In this episode, we're going to hear from Heather Wilde, who's an author, CTO, angel investor, coach, and speaker. She was the 8th employee at Evernote, which was a startup out in the Bay Area that's grown to be a unicorn. She oversaw the company's growth from thousands to millions of customers and worked on a number of different portions of their customer relationship and customer support aspects. She's also published popular games, worked with the U.S. DoD, Navy, Air Force, Space Force. She's trained Fortune 500 brands, advised hundreds of startups, and managed multinational nonprofit programs. She's the CTO of a company called ROCeteer, and she's also that company actually does coaching, mentoring, training, consulting, all for individuals, teams, and brands. And today we're going to be talking about her book, which came out last November of 2020. And it's called Birth of a Unicorn. It's 6 basic steps for success. It's Birth of a Unicorn, 6 basic steps to success, which is available out on Amazon. If you get the link in the show notes, you can check it out or just search on Amazon for Birth of a Unicorn. Before we jump into that interview, though, I want to briefly talk about Startup of the Year in our community. When Jen Consalvo and I started this company, our mission was to, really help startup founders, and it was a bit of a continuation of our work with our years with Tech Cocktail and TechCo, and wanted to really help everyone with their startup journey. That was an aspect that we tried to do through our other work as well. So here we are. We've got community programs and resources that help educate and build relationships. We also offer an opportunity for everyone to celebrate the fine work that everyone's doing at our annual awards. So we have our Startup of the Year awards, which come up at the end of the year. And if you're a startup, it's time again to join, to be a part and be in the running for a shot at being a Startup of the Year. And I invite you as a startup founder to listening to join our growing startup community and partake in our 2021 Startup of the Year awards. So just all you have to do is be a part of our community, and the top companies will invite especially to this event. But if you're not in there yet, if you're not part of our community, you need to apply. So simply go to soty.link/apply. To be eligible for the Startup of the Year awards, you've got to raise less than $5 million in funding, or $0 to $5 million in funding, or have a functional prototype beyond just the idea. And we'll be inviting a handful, probably 100 companies out to our annual summit, which will take place in the fall, and we'll have additional opportunities to connect, showcase, and potentially take home the title of Startup of the Year at that summit. So looking forward to it, and looking forward to some special announcements about that soon. So stay tuned. But before we do, we're going to jump into that interview. All right, let's catch up with Heather Wilde. Welcome, Heather. So great to hear your voice and see you again today. Last time I think we connected, we were in Las Vegas, and it's been a while. So really, really appreciate you being here and joining me today on the podcast.
Thank you, Frank. I am really excited to hear from you too.
Yeah, and since I last talked, I think you wrote a book, right? You've got a new book called Birth of a Unicorn: 6 Basic Steps for Success. Congratulations. That's a big effort.
Thank you. Yeah, it's being received really well with entrepreneurs, and also with people that I didn't expect that are outside the tech community. So that's I'm really happy with the reception.
Yeah, no, it's a great book. It really talks more about life in general. So I want to talk about that in a minute. But before we jump into that, let's just kind of level set for all of our Startup of the Year podcast listeners, and give us a little bit of background on what you've been up to lately, and we can then jump in because I want to talk a lot about the book and everything you've been doing, like with Evernote and everything, and that whole story, because I think it's really interesting. But let's just jump in. What have you been up to lately?
Oh my, what haven't I been up to? Well, actually, it's interesting because a lot of people with COVID, the last couple of years, they've been able to take a pause and rethink and do all that stuff. And I haven't been able to take any breaks at all. I have been working closely with the DoD and the government, and we've actually crossed paths on doing that as well, on helping to work with innovation in the Air Force and the Space Force and across the DoD, Department of Defense, for those that don't like acronyms. Also have been working with like the UN and the CDC and the WHO and groups like that on COVID and vaccine responses. So, I mean, this has been a huge, busy time for me and my company the past couple of years. And also I have a nonprofit that is towards education of the underprivileged and underserved around the world, towards AI and machine learning to help them upskill and reskill, because I mean, there's a coming AI dawn. So I want to make sure that the entire world is prepared for that. And so been super busy.
Well, that's great to hear. And you wrote a book as well. So I'm assuming that that's taking up a little time as well, as you give talks and things of that nature. But we definitely crossed paths. It's funny how that works. We came from a startup-y place and ended up in a government kind of place, but there's a lot of great work to be done in that space. And so that's why I think we've been drawn to it. And so let's just kind of jump in and talk about kind of the early kind of, you're the 8th employee at Evernote. And I was a big fan of Evernote, used it for a long time. I still have an account and use it every so often. But I think for the first part, and when it first came out, especially, I was like a diehard user, and want to just kind of like jump in and talk a little bit more about how you got involved in Evernote, and maybe, share, kind of level set for everyone what that was like.
Wow. So when Evernote first started, it was a germ of an idea, just like it is for every entrepreneur, in one person's head, and that person was Phil Libin. He wanted to create a product that would be able to remember all of his thoughts and ideas and memories and everything when he was 90 years old and his memory was failing. And so he just kept thinking, I want a ribbon of time that would take me, that I can just look at and it'll remember things for me. And I'm one of Phil's older friends, friends that go back for a long time. And I'd worked with him on a company before that. And he just kept talking to all of us, trying to refine this idea and make it happen. And like every conversation he had with us would get it closer to what would become Evernote. And then finally he met another founder that had already created a company called Evernote with a capital N, that had released something close to what he had pictured in his own mind. You can never really get into a founder's head, but it had already gotten somewhere there. And then he's like, hey, this is already kind of in the right realm. Let's take this over and turn it into the rest of the way. And at that point, he pulled all of us in, and we turned it into Evernote with a lowercase n that a lot of people already know.
Wow, that's great. So I didn't realize that that's how it started. That's really interesting. So he kind of took the name and just ran with the idea that he had. Really cool. And you jumped in to really help with the customer support, and customer service, which is really interesting because you and I both met in a very interesting way in Las Vegas, centered around Zappos and Tony Hsieh and the whole downtown project, and customer service being at the center of that. And I don't know if that's why, but I don't remember exactly, but you can kind of share in a minute. But at the end of the day, it's very interesting. That's where you came from. So I'd love to hear, you've got this extensive knowledge in customer service, and you helped build this system for Evernote, which now, is a unicorn, and want to just get your take on what it was like to do that early on, and how you continue to grow that out.
So I'd actually come from a background of game design. And even before that, I was working, actually, I started out with government, and then went into airlines. So I'd had an idea of how an enterprise, large scale system is supposed to work when it does function. And that's in pods. Like you take it's like a hub and spoke kind of system where you have small groups of people at the end that need to connect to a larger kind of brain. And when we were building out Evernote, I had the idea that it was going to be at some point this large scale enterprisey thing eventually. So, and it was going to be a customer facing, it was always going to be about the customers spreading that. So when we were building out, like, what will Evernote be, I always was doing it from the perspective of the end user using the product and the enterprise customer that was eventually down the line. So as like from a customer support perspective, from a QA perspective, and from a like a systems perspective, like in the technical background, we built it like an airline. And I know, and like when I ended up working in Vegas later with Zappos, like it was kind of the same thing. Like they were building it systematically so that they would be able to be an enterprise organization, to be able to deliver things from like a central brain to people individually at their homes. I know it sounds a little strange, but when you're building a startup, you have to think, what is the end goal for, what is the end experience for every user? And it's, for any SaaS platform, it is all about the experience. It's all about the customer.
No, that makes a lot of sense. It's just, from a startup perspective, you may not be thinking of that from the get-go. So how, what did you, what made you, was it your past experience, or what made you kind of go that route? And then what can, startups that are listening take from that? Like, how can they best approach customers, I guess, and how to handle that customer support from that? Is it, how do you create that brain, I guess, is the best question there.
Yeah. So this was our third company. Evernote just didn't happen overnight. It was the third one that we'd all created together. And even before that, we'd all had experience working. It wasn't just like we decided to wake up one day out of high school and create a company. Before that, we'd had experience working. So we did have experience even at 20 years old, whether that came from airlines or government or McDonald's or wherever. We understood how experience worked. I lived in Disney World for 6 months to learn everything about Disney and how they did experience that I could soak in.
And we're going to talk about that a little bit later, because you've got some really great adventures under your belt.
Yeah, but the how a normal, like, everyday startup that's just starting out, like, the best thing that you can do is talk to your customers, talk to the people you want to be your customers, talk to the customers of the competitors of the companies that you're thinking of doing, and see what is it that they like about the products that they're using. What is it that they don't like? What would they want their experience to be? And just think about the products that you do use right now, and like, what is it that you like? What is it that you don't like? And just create a map of all of that. And eventually you'll be able to think your way through a user journey.
That's great advice. Great advice. And along those same lines, now, you started with just you, and at the time, it sounded like your husband doing the Leon doing the customer support for Evernote. But then you had to grow, right? You had to scale. You grew the company. The company grew from, a couple 100,000 users to 1 million users, and then to 5 million users and on. How did you grow that process? And what were some tips about building that team? It's a really important question for startups as they continue to grow. And you were there at the beginning. And how did you scale and grow that team?
So when we started to understand that the work that we had was going to take more time for one person to do than they'd be able to get done in a normal workday consistently. And I'm not talking about a startup workday where people are like expected to work 16 hours a day. I always think about, what would an average person be able to do in a 9 to 5 day? because you cannot scale at 16-hour days. You can only scale at 8-hour work days. So whenever we had too much work for one person to be able to complete consistently in like a work week, it would just back up too much, then that was time to hire somebody else. Like, it didn't matter that I could complete 3 people's work in a day.
Right.
If I was doing that much work, then I needed to hire somebody.
Right. Yeah, that's not sustainable over time. And if anything happened to you, obviously the company wouldn't be able to keep moving the same pace. So it makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about early iPhone, right? So Evernote came out, iPhone didn't exist. iPhone comes out, app economy. What was that role? What was the role of the iPhone in the app economy, and the path and trajectory of Evernote, and how did you guys take advantage of it?
Oh my gosh, it was huge. We had some great biz dev people on our team. Alex Pachkov was instrumental in making sure that we got in the App Store on day one. We didn't have an iPhone to test on. We didn't have an iPad to test on. Like, we just had the code and we had the dev, like, so we knew that we would get on into the App Store on day one based on like all of the relationships that we built. And then from then on, like, because we were in that App Store on day one, like every App Store that existed, we made sure that we would be there. So like, we were in the Google Glass store on day one. We were in the BlackBerry store on day one. We were in the Palm Pre store on day one. So like we just became so diluted to make sure that there was a team for every single platform. But in hindsight, we should have just focused a little bit more rather than being like, we're going to be number one in everything on day one, and just focused on like, what are the users actually using?
Right. No, that makes sense. But yeah, it's pretty impressive. I mean, it had to have impacted the stuff you guys were doing behind the scenes with feedback, customer feedback and customer support, right? Every time you had a new platform.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, all 5 users of our Palm Pilot version were so angry when we stopped using. I'm kidding. There were about 1,000 users of them, and they were really upset when we disabled it.
Oh, I bet. Yep. They were up in arms. Yeah. So interesting stuff. And I love some of the things in the book here. So we're going to shift over, talk about that. So you wrote this book. Wanted to find out what inspired you to write this book. And again, the title of the book is Birth of a Unicorn, 6 Basic Steps for Success. It's out there today. It came out in November of 2020. So you can go get it right now on Amazon or other places. So what inspired you to write this book?
So interestingly, when I started at ROCeteer, which is the company that you and I met because of in Las Vegas, Mark Rowland, who is the CEO of ROCeteer, he is a coach, a very, very good coach. And he said that in order to become a better CTO, more confident and everything, I needed to get out and start speaking and telling my story. And so when we started working together, he said, okay, well, go out and start speaking, start talking about all this stuff. And he noticed that the stories that I was telling to people were really engaging and helpful and stuff. He's like, okay, now you need to write it down. So I want you to write a book now. And so I did. And he's like, I can't believe you actually wrote the book.
Yep. That's great. I love Mark.
But that's it. That's how it came about.
Well, it sometimes just takes a little nudge, and that's really powerful. And Mark, actually, we worked really closely with him as well with Downtown Project back in the Tech Cocktail Tech Co days. So he's been a really good mentor and coach for us as well. So and even today, right? So with some of the stuff we're doing. So I appreciate hearing that. That's really great to hear. Can you tell us a little bit more about first off, the book really is interesting because it kind of tells a story between, I don't want to give it all away, but between your personal and professional life and that work-life balance. And you've done some really interesting things. I mean, you live this digital nomad lifestyle on a 47-foot, sailboat in Mexico while building what essentially turned into a unicorn in Evernote. So what advice do you give anyone trying to improve their work-life balance? Obviously not going to that extreme, but just what advice would you give to anyone that's like, oh, I got to try to figure out something here?
I think that, so interestingly, we went to Mexico because it was too expensive to live in Boston. And it was certainly too expensive to live in San Francisco. So I think that the best advice is, if you're overwhelmed, if you think that you can't afford your cost of living, and people are doing this now, they're looking to see what other options there are. So you don't necessarily have to move onto a sailboat, but look for where you're going to be more happy, where your cost of living, because finances are a huge stressor for people. My marriage was falling apart because I couldn't even talk to my husband about credit card bills that were racking up and all of those red notices we were getting because I was trying to decide whether to pay the heating bill or the electric bill or whatever in Boston. And I was making $100,000 a year and it cost us like $120,000 to live there. So,
right.
But living in Mexico on a boat was like, we got out of debt and we were making great money by doing that. So thinking about what you need in your life and what will allow you to have the ability to do the things that you want to do with your startup, with your life, with your family, that's the first step.
That's great advice. And it just sounds like it was an amazing adventure. How long was that you were down there in Mexico?
5 years.
Wow. Phenomenal. You've probably got some really good stories about some of those sales. And obviously some are in the book and I don't want to give it away, but you'll have to read the book to find out. But how did you, I guess while you were doing that, obviously you talked about a lot about how it helped to be on the boat because it kind of focused you during certain times, and then you'd have your adventures on the weekends. I guess for anybody listening, how do you find that career and professional life balance? If it isn't, the boat, and I know sometimes it's financially driven, maybe it's something simple, within your area. Like how do you balance that stuff? Because it is such a blend these days.
Communication. The main thing is and I figured this out. It took many, many years to realize that the main thing that I was missing was being able to open up and just be communicative. It's not that I was purposely hiding things. It's just that I'm an introvert and my natural state is being quiet. And I've noticed that a lot of people are like that as well. Even if they're extroverts, they're just like, when they're at home with their spouse or with their significant other, or even with their business partners or whoever, you're just so used to trusting that the other person is like, they know how you think for some reason, that you're just quiet and you don't tell them what you're thinking. So being over communicative is now my default. And I recommend that to people like crazy, because it is so much better of a state of mind.
No, that makes sense. And you talk about a number of key things in the book: significance, love, connection, and there's quite a few others. But and I loved how you kind of shared each one and then gave some ways to actively improve or engage in each one of those. Which do you think is the most important of those different factors?
I think the most important one is the one that resonates most with you. Like for me, my greatest need is for contribution. And I feel that by I'm always giving gifts to people. I'm always giving back to community. I'm always if I am not filling my need for contribution, then I am depressed. So, but figuring out what it is for you that you need the most, that's the one that you need to fill. But we all need a little bit of all of them.
No, that makes sense. And you mentioned a moment ago, and you mentioned in the book as well, that there were some times that were, some lows, some real lows. You guys were working really hard around the clock. understaffed, it sounded like a little bit as you continue to grow. And there was an interesting section in there about something that kind of pulled you out of it. And I love the idea that it was it was actually something fun that brought joy, and it was a segue, right? So and a segue is really important in your life.
Yep.
Can you share a little bit more about how that helped you and get out of the kind of rut that you were in? It sounds like you were pretty depressed at the time.
Yeah. So one of the things, and this is a huge problem for women especially, but I mean, everyone can relate to this. Like when you are working so hard, you expect that other people are recognizing that you're working so hard and that you're doing so much. But in reality, everyone else is working as much as you are probably in a company, especially at a startup. So nobody's going to give you a pat on the back for that because you're all working super hard. And so like, I was getting really depressed and worn down because like no one was paying any attention to the fact that like we'd worked like months and months without a single day off. We were working those 16-hour days and it was really hard. But I did have somebody there that was noticing. It was my husband. Because he was working right there with me every day, but he knew that I was working slightly longer hours and not taking a break. And he then schemed behind my back, because I wouldn't have noticed anyway, to get me a Segway, which was something that I'd always wanted. And of course, it's like a status symbol in Silicon Valley to have a Segway, especially at the time. But we couldn't really afford a new one. So he found some used ones. And like, then he drove away on the weekend, like 2 days he was gone, and then came back and he had 2 Segways for us when he came back. And I just cried. I was so excited when I saw them. And then, I mean, I'm even crying thinking about how happy I was when I saw them, because he recognized that I needed a boost. And then like just every time I would get on the Segway, it was just pure joy. And then it would infect the other people around us too, seeing the two of us being like so dorky with our bike helmets on and our elbow pads and all that going through. But I mean, and then we'd let everybody ride them too, like little Mexican kids getting on, like riding a Segway. But it was so fun. And it instantly brought me out of the depression.
That's great. And interesting. It kind of sounds like it kind of dovetailed into something else that's a big thing right now in a lot of different companies. And it's been the kind of hot topic lately is community. And it sounds like the Segway kind of pulled people out of the community together. And I saw that thread in a number of different ways within the different experiences that you got involved in with the boating community. And then in Mexico, there were certain kind of communities. And then you also ended up being an RVer, right? So
Yes.
So we'll talk about the RV in a minute, but I wanted to hear your thoughts on just community in general and how a startup might be able to derive that and kind of the benefits and just overall what you guys did when you were doing Evernote.
Oh, absolutely. Like, so when you're building a startup, unless you're purely just building a B2B or an enterprise level community, enterprise level startup where you don't need to have raving fans, as Tony Hsieh would have said, then your goal is to build up a community. You need to have people that are there to support you as you grow, and like being able to reach out to people, whether it's for advice on whether you have like a book cover that is like the right book cover, the right icons, whether you can have people to ask to beta test your product, or just somebody that you can reach out to turn to if you're crying at night. Like having a personal community is good. Having a professional community is essential. And then building like a fan base, building ambassadors and that tribe of people that adore your products. Just think of all the people that walk around wearing like Burger King hats around the world. Like even Pharrell wears like that the Arby's hat. I mean, people that just love products and are willing to talk about them for fun, because they're fans of them and not because they're being paid for that. That's the goal. So yeah, communities, because people are like naturally affiliated towards something, that's what you need to tap into as you're growing.
No, that makes sense. And it sounds like you guys had built some community and did it around, even around the iPhone. I think, what was it called? Elephant spotting. So you saw people using the
Yeah.
iPhone and iPhone app for Evernote back in the day, and you did some fun things with giveaways and whatnot. So really interesting stuff. Any lessons learned there that you want to share?
Yeah, so we would run campaigns, so contests really, that if we wanted, we always had different t-shirts and stickers and things that we would give out, and rather than us design them, we would run design contests. So we would have people design what the new t-shirt should be, and then like by asking all these amazing like artists to come up with awesome artwork, not only would we have like great things designed for us for free, but then like it would, people would be sharing like, vote for my thing to become the next Evernote design. And then we'd also have hackathons where like we'd open up our API for like great designers and developers to like use our API to get their products into our system. And that's how like Sketch was developed, and Penultimate and Peak and some of the other products. And then like there's a lot of people in the Evernote marketplace that don't even know they're using Evernote because they're using some other product that's just using the Evernote API. And so, I mean, there's so many ways to grow a product, and a lot of those things we were just inventing that other people are now using as a standard.
Yeah, very cool. You guys are blazing the path. All right, we're getting to be about at time. Is there anything else you wanted to share about the book, or just overall thoughts? Who did you want to write this book for, and any other thoughts about it?
Well, I really wanted to write this book for people that are buying business books and don't understand how it applies to them, because I see so many people reading business books and then they're like, well, great. So Amazon is like $1 trillion company and I'm just getting started, and I can try to figure this out. Somebody told me once that they read this one book about how to lose weight, and it changed their life because they were like, inside of it were the actual steps that this person followed and the motivations behind why they followed these steps at every point in time. And like the person read this, they followed the steps and they actually lost weight in the same way. So I read that book and I decided, well, that makes sense. I understand it. And it was because the person gave you the motivations, gave you the context of why they did something. And I haven't found another business book like that. So that's why I wrote this in this way.
Love it. So yeah, totally. You needed it. So you try to drink your own champagne there a little bit, and that's or scratch your own itch, if you will. So that's really great. So, all right. So that makes a lot of sense. So I guess to wrap, is there anything else you wanted to share? Anything else, or I guess where can people get in touch with you if they wanted to connect?
Well, you can find me on the internet anywhere. I use Heatheriel as my socials. And you can also find me at heatheriel.com. And really just, I'm pretty reachable. I'm generally pretty busy, but I always make time for helping out entrepreneurs. So happy to talk to any of the people that are listening to this podcast. And I always make time for 15-minute meetings on my calendar.
Thanks so much, Heather. I'm sure our listeners will take a lot from your story, and really interesting stuff with your early beginnings there with Evernote. And I always love hearing those stories. So thanks for sharing on this episode. And if you were listening and you found this conversation helpful or you thought it was interesting, please do share it. And hopefully somebody new will learn something as well. Sharing is caring. All right, before we go, I wanted to spread the word about Finmark. They're a company that came through a Startup of the Year in our community. And something that we really believe in. We feel like it's helpful for companies that are in the community. So Finmark is actually a financial planning software for startups for revenue forecasting, cash projections, and runway. So it's one of the few products that we feel like can do that job. The current de facto is probably Excel. So this will help you figure it out in a better way and potentially not make mistakes that could cost you millions or potentially billions of dollars. So go check out Finmark, and you can sign up for a free 30-day trial on us if you go to est.us/Finmark. Again, it's est.us/Finmark. Okay, folks, that should do it for today. If you're a startup or you have a startup idea and you want to get it going today is the best day to start up, not tomorrow, not the next day. Get it going, get it out there. And I encourage you in doing so to join our community for access to support, expert advice, and resources. Everything you need to elevate your startup and enjoy the journey. So go to soty.link/apply and become a part of our community today. Until next time, I'm Frank Gruber signing off. Thanks again for listening. Wishing you the best of luck and future success in all of your startup adventures.
Thanks for listening to the Startup of the Year podcast. Be sure to subscribe and we'll be back with another episode soon.